That is a very good question and a very hard question. And really kind of the foundation of what I am trying to do is because I think you've kind of hit one of the important nails right on the head is that there are people with a lot of technical training, mathematical training that whose job it is to build these models and they do not understand the language of, what is the difference between an intersectional control variable and intersectionality, not the same thing. And then there are people who have tremendous training and understanding of like social justice and what intersectionality actually is. And while they were learning all of that, they also did not get taught the language to talk to the data people or talk to the IT people. The people who set up your database at work control like 70% of the equity work that can happen. And they're not thinking about equity at all when they set up some kind of, HR database. Um, and so it is for the first really practical tip I would give is I would not try on the first go to convert anybody to the idea that their models are not objective. That is too hard. That's too hard of a place to start. And they're going to usually, even well-intentioned, well-resourced people are going to get defensive because they're going to feel threatened. They're going to feel like their professional job is at risk. And so I don't advise taking that route to have the philosophical conceptual conversation. I do advise taking a more technical, grounded, practical route, only focusing on like the model that you're asking them to build, and asking like the smallest, most concrete questions that you can. Um, like, um, like if we go back to Anna Maria's example of like controlling for something, you might want to ask the person, what they are controlling for in the model they're building and why, and how that changes uh, what question the model is answering, because that's what it means when the control variables change. It changes the question that the variable is answering. And that's something that a reasonably good IT person or statistical person or data scientist should be able to answer. It doesn't require them to really grok the idea that this means that they're changing the worldview. Like they don't have to know that right now. But they do have to know that it is changing the question that gets answered. So in the Bangladesh example, one model answered the question, because of the control variables. How much more milk are the cows producing, regardless of how much more time the women are spending on dairy? And the other model was asking the question, how much more milk are these cows producing relative to the increased amount of time they are spending on dairy? And so that's a question that your data person should be able to answer. And you ideally will spend a little bit of time before that conversation thinking about what question do you want that model to answer? Because if you can clearly articulate what question you want your model to answer, your data person, if they are reasonably good, should be able to build that specific model. And they may have to talk to you about it, but the problem can be solved often by getting very, very, very specific and concrete about what the question is or what the definition of success is without having the philosophical conversation. Not that it doesn't matter, but you probably don't have a year to educate your person. You just want to get the model done. It is very, very challenging. It is much easier, of course, to provide tools to people who are already on side or already believe it. And I would say the middle group of people is the scientists who don't understand it, but they're curious. And then the third group of people is the people who are so defensive or so threatened, that it honestly might not be worth investing in, because they're already like, they're not persuadable voters, shall we say. So I spend most of my time on the first two, which is people who already want tools. And then I spend a lot of time on that second, which is scientists who are curious, who are willing to have a conversation about it. And what I do is I use very, 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 I do two things. I use very simple examples, like way more simple than the examples that I've been using here, where I demonstrate that they actually like cannot calculate a rate without a denominator. And uh, as soon as you choose a denominator, you've adopted a set of values. And I used to for a long time, like the example that I start with, because I do a lot of sectoral teaching. So I'm working with like biologists, ecologists, and like elementary school teachers. So I use a classroom size example, which I'm happy to share here. It's actually already also on our YouTube channel that was shared in the chat, where I show that if you calculate average classroom size, if you take it from the teacher's perspective or the student's perspective, another way to say that is if you use the denominator of teachers or the denominator of students, you will get a different answer. And that answer gets more divergent the bigger the school gets. And that you cannot take that class, you cannot calculate the average classroom size in a school without using a denominator. No matter how good of a scientist you are, you need a denominator. And they cannot choose. And if they say, oh, well, one of those is a weighted denominator, one of those is a weighted average, and one of those is a simple average, the answer to that is all averages are weighted averages. We call the average that is weighted by the denominator that we are habituated to, we call that the simple average. But there's nothing that scientifically distinguishes a simple average from a weighted average. It's cultural. And then the second thing I do, and oh yeah, so I used to carry around with me, and I still do, depending on where I'm going, like a little bag that actually has little tiny, like they're about like 2 inches high, get them on Etsy, dolls, and a little classroom where I like am like, put these dolls in this classroom and like have your hands do this. Like you cannot, and that has gone well with everybody up to people who are just so threatened and defensive and think that this means, and they've articulated this, think like all my life's work is going to mean nothing if I agree with this. You're probably not going to convince that person, at least not in the room, right? They might go back and think about it. Second thing is I find a scientific question that they really emotionally do care about. Like, what do you care about in your research? And let's look at the ways that the results that you're producing are going to change as you make different choices, nitty gritty small choices, like what denominator are you using, or what proxy variable are you using, or are you going to control for that as a moderator or a confounder, like nitty gritty choices. And if they can see it improving their evidence, they will adopt it immediately. But none of it's magic. And, I have been called many, many, many bad words on a regular basis. But my personality type is I'm like, that makes me happy. And I see that as like one of my roles, right? Like